There we go.
Good morning, everyone. I'll call this meeting of the Chicago Metropolitan Board to order. The meeting is being live streamed. Members, in order for online attendees to hear, please make sure you are unmuted for a microphone when speaking. Please identify yourself when making or seconding a motion so that the secretary can capture who is making the motions. For those attending in person, please complete the sign-in sheet located in the hallway. If you wish to make a public comment, please fill out the public comment card and return to a staff member. For those participating via Zoom, please keep your microphone muted unless you are called upon to speak. When appropriate on the agenda, we will request comments from those online, and you can indicate your desire to speak via the chat box. The staff is monitoring Zoom, and we'll recognize you when it's time to speak. Aaron, call the roll, please.
Thank you. And just a quick reminder, we have a couple members joining online. I will call your names, but we will officially recognize you after we do the roll call in the room first. So Mayor Bennett,
Present.
Frank Beal,
Present.
President Brawley, Mayor Grasso,
Here.
Mayor Hofert,
Here.
Ada Mudia, Mayor Noak,
Here.
President Reinbold, John Robertson, Mayor Rodering, Stephen Schaefer,
Here.
Carolyn Schofield, Ann Sheehan,
Here.
Matt Walsh,
Here.
Leanne Redden, and Chorus Muhammad.
Yeah.
Before I officially call the roll, board must vote the members who are on Zoom to be allowed to be in the meeting. And that is members Carolyn Schofield, Leanne Redden, Matt Broley, Paul Holford, and John Noak. I'll entertain a motion that they are accepted into the meeting.
I'll make the motion.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? If not, all in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, vote of no, and the motion carries. And welcome. We do have a quorum. And first item on the agenda
It's me.
is you. I thought
It's
we did
me.
minutes first.
Oh, yeah, you know what? That is funny.
Hmm.
The minutes. Oh,
Chair will-
you know what? It's because we are shifting our agenda to allow for the consent agenda. So things are in a little bit
Oh,
different. order
okay.
here.
Aaron, you're up.
Remember these things sometimes.
Hmm.
Okay, so first I'm going to talk about the consent agenda, which is what reminded me that the meeting agenda is just a tad bit different here. As part of our efforts to update the bylaws that were approved last month, we are organizing our agenda a little bit differently to add the consent portion of the agenda here. Again, this will allow us to group items in a single vote based on criteria and the bylaws. Again, it's a common approach used by local governments, but recognizing that not everybody on our board has served in a local government capacity. I just wanted to point that out for you. So today you'll find the April 10th minutes are under the consent, but typically we'll have our procurement items under the consent. And you'll expect to see several of those the next couple months as we prepare for the start of the fiscal year, July 1. So look for a future next month's meeting will be a little bit more consolidated than you'll see today. Any item can be removed from the consent agenda at the board meeting by the request of any one member, and upon removal, that item will be considered and voted upon separately. So any questions on that first before I move on? No que- Okay, great. So today I just wanted to take a moment and recognize and celebrate the public servants around me here at CMAP, both my staff, but also recognize that many of you too are in public service. The first week of May has been devoted to honoring people who do the work to keep our local governments and our communities running on a day-to-day basis. And this has been in place since 1985. So I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude to my team for all they do on a day on and day out basis here. And then all of the commitments and work that your teams and yourselves do on behalf of the public here in Northeastern Illinois. At our all-staff meeting this week, we do a series of recognition awards for our staff in terms of good governance and projects that have been really successful. And those nominations come from their peers. And so we're very excited to recognize the hard work of our teams here. So thank you for that. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Mobility Authority Act. So as many of you know, at the end of April, the Clean and Equitable Transportation Act was filed. Again, it's an omnibus bill that includes several transit and climate-related provisions that would impact the region. One of those bills is the Metropolitan Mobility Act. It does address some of the topics that we discussed in our plan of action for regional transit here. The bill offers a range of governance reforms, including consolidating of the RTA and the service boards into one entity to manage and operate the transit systems across our region. We are continuing to evaluate the bill. It is not a small bill, it's a small novel. But we want to provide more detailed input to our legislators, our partners, and the bill sponsors as well. I think some of our key takeaways that I'll just share with you this morning in our initial reading of the bill is just that we want to make sure we're maintaining the three-legged stool approach that we put forth in the part report, which is really, improvements to the existing system that we have, that it's funding, and that it is also governance. And all of those three things are connected. So decisions on how we improve the system and how we fund it and how we govern it, again, just like I said, are all interlinked. There was a supplemental appropriations bill filed as well that would provide $1.5 billion for transit. We are eager and offering our services to be part of the conversation as to how we reach that $1.5 billion. As you saw and experienced in the part report, there were a number of ideas for how we get to that number here. But as I've talked to the bill sponsors, they've really noted for me that this is the start of a discussion here, that they're expecting to do hearings over the summer. So we expect that these deliberations will be continuing and ongoing here. I think just another note here is that while that's sort of gotten the headlines and the bylines in the press recently, the omnibus bill also does include two other climate-related bills that were also filed individually. One would introduce several new zero-emission vehicle provisions, and the other one is called the Transportation Choices Act, which would set a statewide greenhouse gas target for the transportation sector. And it also details several steps for MPOs and IDOT and the things that we would need to do differently to ensure that the Regional Transportation Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program is in compliance with state targets for greenhouse gas reduction. So as you all know, we've got a lot of work underway right now that'll help us understand and accelerate the emissions reduction conversation here. You've heard about our work on the climate action planning work. So we do feel like we will have the tools to be able to evaluate and consider future changes into the future. But we really want to get a better understanding of what is in the bill, its potential impacts, and understanding how that aligns with our federal work as well. So there will be more to come, more analysis from our team to come, but I will pause here and see if there are any questions or discussion from committee members.
None being?
I'm going to keep rolling through then.
You got it.
All right. On April 25th, both the Regional Economy Committee and the Climate Committee held meetings in person. This has been the first time these bodies have convened in many months due to challenges that we have with quorum. But these committees are made up of local experts, regional experts on both our regional economy and on our climate issues. They had very robust discussions on both at both agendas and heard a little bit more about some of the climate action planning work that we're doing, as well as heard a little bit about our housing data snapshots and our job quality access tool that we have. So just a little bit of detail on those meetings. They were well attended, and we're excited to get folks back in person and talking about these issues and hopefully bring their insights then back up to you all through the process that we've set up here. CMAP released a conformity amendment to the federal fiscal year 24 to 28 Transportation Improvement Program, which is open for public comment through May 21st. Again, conformity analysis for new members is part of our requirements, and it is how we model the processes and evaluate transportation plan impacts on our region and on the air quality. On-road emission vehicles are reviewed to determine that the region will reach our national ambient air quality goals. So we do this frequently. If you do want to hear a little bit more about conformity, don't hesitate to reach out. Our team would be happy to share a little bit more detail about that process. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that our Future Leaders in Planning program is open for applications right now. It is our high school program where we engage high school students from across the region and really understanding what community planning is, expose them to, the municipal process, different issue areas that they're interested in. And we've had some success. This has been going on since, before 2010, I suppose. So for quite some time, and it's just such a really great project process to see, and we've had a number of students come through the program that have gotten interested in public sector work and ended up in planning fields. And so it's just a delight. If you'd like to learn more, if you know young people that are interested, we can certainly share with you the information about that and get folks involved. So applications are due May 22nd.
Any questions of Aaron? Next item on agenda would be to approve the consent agenda, and with this meeting, it's basically the minutes as the only item on consent. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion, Noak.
You were overridden. Moved and seconded. Aaron, you want to call the roll on this one?
On the minutes?
On the consent?
Oh, on the consent agenda, sure. Let me go back to get myself a list of you all. Mayor Bennett?
Aye.
Frank Beal?
Aye.
President Brawley?
Aye.
Mayor Grasso? Mayor Hofert?
Aye.
Eda Mudia? Aye. Mayor Noak?
Aye.
Reinbold? John Robertson? Mayor Rodering? Stefan Schaefer?
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Ann Sheehan? Aye. Matt Walsh?
Yes.
And the motion carries. Thank you. Next item is the recommendation from the executive committee regarding our executive director's contract. The executive committee met twice regarding the contract and have made a recommendation which should have been part of or is in your package. The question I have for the board, whether it's necessary to go into an executive session regarding this issue. If not, the motion can be made to approve the executive director's contract for the next 5 years. Any questions before I entertain that motion at all? If the board is satisfied.
I'll
with-
motion to approve, Noak.
The motion is to approve the contract of our executive director, which is item 4.02, and seconded. Any questions regarding that? I'll have a call a roll on this also.
Sounds good. Mayor Bennett?
Aye.
Frank Beal? President Brawley?
Aye.
Mayor Grasso? Mayor Hofert?
Aye.
Nina Ida Mudia? Aye. Mayor Noak?
Aye.
President Reinbold? John Robertson? Mayor Rodering? Stefan Schaefer?
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Ann Sheehan? Matt Walsh?
Yes.
And the motion carries. Congratulations, and thank you for a great job.
Well, thank you. Thanks to all of you for your support and your leadership as I continue. I'm very excited to continue to lead this agency on behalf of you all, on behalf of our staff. It's just been a true honor. And so thank you for your trust in me.
Thanks, Aaron. Moving on to the next item, it's the financial audit. Stephanie? Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I should make this really high, but that's all right. I'll just deal. Good morning. I'm Stephanie Pfeiffer, interim finance deputy at CMAP. Before I introduce Martha Trotter from Sickage to go over the details of our audit, I wanted to give you an update on our new ERP system. So the team has been working diligently to get the system configured and get all the staff trained, and we are on target to hit our go live date on July 1st. The system that we selected was Microsoft D365. We selected the system because of the functionalities and it'll meet our needs, but also because it'll work seamlessly with the other Microsoft products that we're already using at the agency. Our legacy system, as you know, really had reached its end of its useful life. We installed that system in 2009, which was 15 years ago. And if technology is anything like dog years, that's 75 years old. So if that gives you some indication as to the system that the legacy system that we're leaving behind and the system that we're going to. The legacy system really, we were dependent on institutional knowledge and multi-step workarounds and record keeping with dual spreadsheets in order to keep everything accurate. And so we did a good job with that, but we're excited about having a system to help us do that. We're going to have increased accuracy and efficiency. Some of the places that's going to help us is automation. So there's going to be a lot more calculations and reports that are going to happen automatically instead of, as I mentioned, more of the manual approach of the past. There's going to be more intentional workflows and information shared throughout the process. And then information sharing just to the team. So there's going to be a lot more information at everybody's fingertips as far as the performance measures and the spends and the targets for our projects, which will be shared with all of you. So we're also hoping that we're going to be able to provide the board and our constituents with a lot more information about what all the projects are that the agency is working on and where we're at with all of those projects. So the system is going to allow us to have a lot more of that transparency, all while saving us more time. So with that, just wanted to give you a brief overview. Now I will turn it over to Martha Trotter, who is a principal at Sickage, to review the FY23 audit reports. You do have paper copies at your places. And then unless there's any questions of me, I will turn it over to Martha.
I do have a question.
Oh, sure.
And I don't mean this in a negative way. But the new system, because of all the things that it'll generate or things that it will take away from being done manually now, will this lessen our need for either hiring in the future, or if somebody were to leave, maybe not replacing them?
We definitely will be assessing our staffing needs after we get the system implemented. There will be a little bit of time where we're doing some migration of information from one system to the next. So we do think that the next year or two, we are going to be doing some of that sort of additional maintenance on the data. But absolutely after that, we'll be assessing the needs of the agency, and more than likely there'll be other work that some of those individuals can actually do that has been on our wish list for quite some time, including some of our grant readiness programs. So we've been going out into the community, and some of our grant staff and some of our finance staff has actually been working with communities to help them with their financial health. And so we're actually hoping some of the staff will be able to free up some time for programs such as that.
Okay, so redirect their efforts to do other things.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, I don't want anybody to think that I was saying that people should lose their jobs. I was just saying, you know, it would seem now that we could be more efficient or use those resources in a different way, and you've answered that. So thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Okay, we have Margaret Trotter on the line.
Good morning. Thank you, board members. I am Martha Trotter. I'm a principal at Sickage and the lead auditor for the agency's financial statement audit. I'm here this morning to present to you the results of the financial statement audit for the year ending June 30th, 2023. So hopefully you've had a chance to review in detail the reports that have been issued as part of the financial statement audit. That's the annual financial report, as well as the board communication that we issue. And to assist in the review, I will see if I can share my screen with you. Hopefully you have copies as well.
Martha, we do have copies in front of us.
Okay, perfect. So as I go through, I'll call out the page numbers to assist in providing you information of what information I'm referring to. So I will be presenting to you the results of the annual financial report, as well as highlighting some key items from the board communication. The annual financial report is where you'll find our independent auditor's report on the agency's financial statements. That begins on pages 1 through and runs through page 3 of the annual financial report. I am pleased to be able to present a clean, unmodified opinion on the agency's financial statements. As you know, the financial statements are presented on a comparative basis. So you have both the June 30th, 2023 financial information, as well as the June 30th, 2022 comparative financial statements. So as I noted, we have issued a clean, unmodified opinion that is the highest level of assurance we can provide with respect to the accuracy and fairness of the presentation of the agency's financial position and its conformance with generally accepted accounting principles. Here, I'd just like to highlight also, as many of you know, as many of you are part of an audit process at your respective entities, there is a great deal of information that as auditors, we are required to review and test, and the requests can be pretty burdensome, especially as they are in addition to running the day-to-day operations of the agency. So I just want to extend our appreciation for the staff at the agency working with us and providing us the information to be able to present this level of opinion on the financial statements. We do appreciate that it is a great deal of information that we request. So we're grateful for everyone's working with us and the professionalism that is provided to us. In the independent auditors report on page 2, you'll find information on the responsibilities of management at the agency for these financial statements, as well as our responsibilities as the independent auditors as they relate to the financial statements. Following the independent auditors report, if there's nothing else in the annual financial report that you read, I do highly recommend reading the management discussion and analysis. This is prepared by the agency. It serves as an executive summary of the financial statements and provides a bit of context to the numbers, as well as some comparative analysis that's not included in the basic financial statements themselves. So this MD&A runs through page numbers MD&A 1 through MD&A 7, and it includes some financial highlights, provides some graphical information and comparative tables so that you can see how certain balances have changed, as well as some analysis as to what caused the changes in these balances that is not necessarily available in the basic financial statements themselves. So I do highly encourage the board to review the management discussion and analysis, as this is a great section of the report to gather and obtain some additional comprehension of what's included in the financial statements. I'll briefly touch on the basic financial statements. The statement of net position can be found on page 5 of the annual financial report, and the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position is the following page, page 6. That is the agency's income statement. So it's just a few items to note. On the statement of net position or the balance sheet, you can find the agency's net position for the year ended June 30th, 2023 of $8 million. That was a slight increase over the prior year of just over $1 million. So an improvement in the agency's net position over the previous fiscal year. The operating income of the agency that's found on page 6, you can see was pretty consistent with the previous fiscal year, just under 1.3 million. The overall change in net position, that 1 million related to additional investment income, as well as lease expenses, which are associated with the agency's lease of the post office. I'm not going to cover in detail the footnotes and the other required supplementary information and other information that's included in the annual financial report. I'll move to the next section of the financial statements, which is the single audit report, and that begins on page 49. So as you are aware, the agency has a significant amount of grant expenses throughout its year. So related to the grant expenses, there's additional auditing requirements to conform with government auditing standards, as well as a requirement to conform with the federal government's uniform grant guidance. So the single audit section of the report pertains to those requirements. Here we have the independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters, and this is in accordance with government auditing standards. One item to note, what's required to be communicated in this section of the single audit report is if there were any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that arose as part of our testing, and if there were any instances of non-compliance. There were no material weaknesses that came up throughout the course of our audit testing. However, we did disclose one item on the schedule of findings that is considered a significant deficiency. This related to the preparation of the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So this is noted here on the schedule of findings, as well as included on the second report that I'll be covering with you, the board communication. So as part of our audit and the single audit requirements, the agency is required to prepare a schedule of expenditure of federal awards. This information is requested annually as part of the single audit testing. There were some issues in gathering the data and getting a schedule that accurately presented the agency's fiscal year federal expenditures. As Stephanie noted prior to in the introduction, with the change in the agency's ERP system, and this is acknowledged in the corrective action plan, which I will highlight briefly as well. There's hopefully the hope is with the new ERP system and the structuring of the accounts, there will be some additional reporting that comes out of the new system that is not the current system is not capable of, that will assist in providing more accurate information and will alleviate some of the manual burdens in preparing these schedules, so that as is noted in the corrective action plan, essentially the agency's response to this finding is that the hope is that this will be alleviated with additional reporting from a more robust system that has additional capacity that the current system does not have. So that corrective action plan is the agency's response to that significant deficiency is highlighted here on page 60 of the report. Associated with that, there were no instances of non-compliance that were noted throughout our testing. So just the one item that came up was the significant deficiency that's included on the schedule of findings. And I can address any questions related to the annual financial report before I move on to the board communication.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. Just the mayor and me, but I go right to operating expenses all the time in my budget. It's the
Mhm.
easiest thing for me to understand. And I note two significant jumps in the last couple of years, basically 34% increase in operating expenses over the 2 years at clips of $4 million each year. Going from $21 million a couple of years ago, now up to almost 30. Why is that?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the explanation for that is the increase from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act added about a 30% increase to the MPO funding that comes to all MPOs across the country. So we did receive and benefit from that. In addition, we've been pretty successful in receiving grants. So last year, we had about $500,000 in a Build America Bureau grant. The other $500,000 was the previous year. And then we did receive about $5 million from the Safe Streets for All program, the federal program. So it really is federal grants that we've been receiving recently and additional federal funds that come through the transportation bill through formula.
So it's driven by grants that you've been successful in receiving. Kudos for that. Just trying to throw some cold water on it. What happens when the grants don't come?
Yep.
You've had this big increase in operating expense. What do we do with our employees?
Yeah, so we actually have taken a more conservative approach to how we expend those dollars. So less on increasing headcount and more on thinking about the balanced approach between how do we supplement that with consultants. So it's definitely, I don't know if it's 50-50 in terms of how we've thought about tackling that, but we are, really focused on making sure that we aren't in a position where we do have to cut staff resources, but that we're thinking about how we supplement our operational expenses with consultant resources, because that allows us to be more flexible in times when, if things should change in the next
And I
transportation.
noticed that when you do get a grant, it appears that there has to be a match at the local, so-called local level, state level, whatever. We are not in the best fiscal state in the nation by far. And so I think that's also a concern. While we may be able to get these grants, are we going to get the match?
Yeah, and that's really understandable. We did not have match for the CMAP did not have match in our coffers for the Safe Streets for All program. And so one of the unique things that Stephanie and her team did was go to all of the parties that were going to be the recipients of that planning work. So all of the counties and IDOT came up with a local match for us. So something that was innovative in that our agency did not have to scrounge for additional match and in our general fund, but really thinking about if we're doing this planning work in conjunction with Lake County or with DuPage County, they also participated in their DOTs in many instances, put up the matching funds. So, but I hear you and I appreciate that.
Well, and I hear you, and it sounds like your eye is on it, but
Yep.
I'd keep I'm sure you will, but I'd keep my eye on it.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Auditor, you can continue, Margaret? Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So in addition to the annual financial report, we are required to issue an auditor's communication to those charged with governance. So that is the second packet that you have with you today, and that is the smaller of the two. So I will, there's some certain required information that we, our auditing standards require us to communicate. That is included in this packet here. On page 2 of this report, you will find some information on new pronouncements that were implemented that impacted the financial statements. So as some of you may be aware of GASB statement number 96, which is regarding how subscription-based IT arrangements are accounted for. That was implemented for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023, which did require some additional quite a bit of additional legwork on and preparation on the part of the agency, as well as additional audit testing procedures to ensure that any applicable IT arrangements were accounted for accurately in the financial statements. For the agency, all of the calculations were included on the past adjustment schedule, which is included in this board communication packet, and I will highlight that in just a brief moment. Also, we do disclose significant accounting estimates that are reflected in the financial statements. So we consider the balances associated with the agency's IMRF, SERS, and OPEB plans to be considered significant estimates. We rely on actuarial calculations, which those balances are determined by, and those are then incorporated into the agency's financial statements. Those are pretty significant balances associated with those pension plans and the OPEB plan. So we just disclosed to those charged with governance here that those are considered to be significant estimates. We note here difficulties encountered in performing the audit. As I noted, there was a significant deficiency, and that is included in this board communication as well, associated with the preparation of the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So that did cause some delays in the audit process, as we received several reports that we were not able to utilize, as they did not have accurate information. So it took some time to get a schedule of expenditures of federal awards that was accurate and able to be utilized for auditing purposes. So that did result in some delays of release and issuance of the financial statements. In terms of corrected and uncorrected misstatements, corrected misstatements means any audit adjustments that were reflected in the balances that are reported in the annual financial report. Uncorrected misstatements are those that are not considered materially significant to the financial statements. So they were not actually, those adjustments were not actually made to the financial statements. However, there is a schedule in the board communication that reflects those past adjustments. Which on page 5 is a list of the audit adjustments that were proposed and made, and these are those that are reflected in the annual financial report. The majority of these related to those, as I noted, those significant estimate balances, correction of IMRF and SERS plan balances to align with the actuarial calculations, as well as an adjustment for the GASB 87 lease activity associated with the lease of office space. And then on page 6 is what I refer to as the past adjustments. So the GASB 87 and 96 components that were not considered significantly material to the financial statements, these are presented here. This would be the impact on the financial statements had these adjustments been posted. Since they are not materially significant, it was determined to include these on the past adjustments for the board's reference only. And then finally, the management letter begins on page 8. And here is where we disclose any material weaknesses, which I noted we had none that arose as part of our audit testing. We do discuss the significant deficiency associated with the preparation of the SEFA, or the schedule of expenditures of federal awards here once again. And then additionally, we provide discussion of future accounting pronouncements, which may have impact on subsequent years' financial statements. Any questions on the the board communication.
Mayor?
Just another question. So if we do have a material deficiency in the expenditures, we now have a new software system. Is that going to get rectified by our new software system?
That is our expectation. So a lot of the work has been done by hand, pulling numbers out, repeating them and putting them into new systems. And so this automates a lot of that. We are also planning on training all of our staff to make sure that they understand sort of the differences between pulling these things. But we truly believe, and Stephanie has been working tirelessly to make sure that our new ERP system does what it needs to do for 21st century.
Okay, and to the extent where we wouldn't expect Margaret to have to tell us about a material
Yes.
deficiency next year.
Yes, that is
Okay.
my expectation.
Just closing the circle.
Thank you.
Fair enough, Mayor. They only mentioned it about 10 times, but. Margaret, anything else you have for us?
That is all I have, unless there are any other questions.
Any other questions? None being, again, we thank you for the audit and board before you is the audit. And I'll entertain a motion to accept that audit. Moved and seconded, all in favor, signify in the usual manner. Motion carried. Moving on. Next item is the community outreach and engage and empower. Mike, is Michael? Oh, there he is. Michael Brown.
Yes, here. Good morning. Good to be before you again to talk about this topic and garner your inputs and your insights. Based on our last conversation in February, we felt it will be more appropriate this time to dive a little bit deeper into two of our engagement pilots. The first will be CARE, which we are in our last year of this pilot. And the second one will be the participatory budget, which is the second item that will be presented by Katie hereafter. Now we can move to the next slide. It's just for our remembrance and orientation. Last time I introduced these levels as articulated in our participation plan to explain our staffing resources and time that's needed to execute this work. It increases as we go from inform up to collaborate. At the same time, it's typical that the size of our target audience and participants decreases as we go from inform to collaborate. So excited to talk about CARE a little bit today because the primary objective of this work is to expand the audience at the collaborate level beyond the implementers, the technical experts, and the governmental officials to include community-based organizations. Excuse me. And many of these community-based organizations represent and directly interacts with many of the populations impacted by our work. Next slide. And although this pilot is not finished, the seeds of this work, specifically the convening and compensating of community-based organizations, have been sown across this agency. With support from the MacArthur Foundation, we were able to convene and compensate CBOs to advance equity and flood resilience program projects and policies. We are currently in conversations with FHWA to establish a framework to enhance the engagement activities of our Safe Streets for All program with an eye for the marginalized and vulnerable population. And that also will include a compensation model. And all of this work is really building on a 2016-2017 initiative with FHWA when the agency received a small grant to expand our public engagement for the OWN to 2050 plan. Of note, CMAP was recognized just last week during a USDOT virtual presentation for their initial work back in 2016 and 2017. So wait till they hear what we've been doing since then. At this point, I'll ask Jules to come up, and Jules will be doing a little level setting with some background information for our new board members, and then swiftly moving to some of our recent actions and lessons learned.
Wish I was as tall as Michael, but. All right, thanks everybody. My name is Jules Voigt. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a planner in the Regional Policy and Implementation Division. And today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about CMAP's Community Alliance for Regional Equity, or the CARE program, for which I'm the junior project manager. So CMAP has robust programs of work when it comes to communications and engagement. However, we will always face the challenge of conducting authentic, meaningful engagement at a regional scale on a continuous basis. And specifically historically, and still today, low-income and disadvantaged communities, which are sometimes called environmental justice communities, are often left out of the planning process. And even with dedicated and robust engagement plans, community-based organizations often face barriers to participation and engagement, sometimes in the form of time, resources, or access. And so CARE seeks to remedy this by working to ensure that people from all over the region, and especially those from environmental justice communities who often face barriers to participation, are able to engage in the work at CMAP. And so what is environmental justice and why is it important? Environmental justice is defined as the just treatment and meaningful engagement of all people, regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability in agency decision-making and other federal activities that affect human health and in the environment. And so when it comes to our work at CMAP, next slide, please. There are various laws that mandate metropolitan planning organizations to consider this equitable participation and environmental justice communities in our planning processes. Some of those laws are listed here. But beyond our personal priority and legal obligations, these laws also indicate that environmental justice and equitable community engagement in the planning process is both a priority at the federal and state government levels. Next slide, please. And so at a 30,000-foot level, CARE is a focus group that brings together a diverse set of community-based organizations from across the region to provide feedback on our projects here at CMAP with the goal to reduce transportation burdens on low-income and disinvested communities. Next slide, please. And what this looks like on a day-to-day level of the CARE program is that for a year, we meet monthly with 14 different community-based organizations to discuss CMAP projects. They provide feedback, and we discuss the on-the-ground complications of transportation and policy with a priority on environmental justice communities. And our challenge as a staff is when we're working with them is to overcome barriers to inclusion in regional decision-making and to reduce burdens of transportation for environmental justice communities. And the photos that you see on the bottom are photos from some of our meetings, which show our partners sitting around a table having discussions and our project managers here at CMAP presenting on the projects that they're working on. Next slide, please. And so when we initially set out to design the CARE program, we at CMAP understood that we don't know everything when it comes to engaging with community nonprofits. And so we relied on the experts out in the field. And so to help with this, we convened an advisory group, which is the group shown on the left. And they helped us design this program in a way that could really meet the needs of community-based organizations and to make sure that equity was considered throughout all aspects of the program, all the way from the application process itself to the very content of the meetings. And on our right, these are our partners who continue to help us administer and evaluate the program, including CNT, Daylight, Borderless Studio, and UIC. Next slide, please. This is the wonderful CMAP team that is carrying out the project work. And on the right, you can see the various CMAP projects that have come before the CARE cohort over the past year and a half. And as I mentioned, this program helps us grapple with the implementation of our projects here at CMAP. But what these project titles don't necessarily show is that we engage from projects from across the agency. So it comes from our research analysis and programming division. It comes from our engagement team, our policy and planning teams. And all of those projects cover a variety of different topics, from climate to transportation to the household travel survey. Next slide, please. And so where have we been and where are we now? In terms of the overall lifespan of the program, year one really consisted of just getting our feet under ourselves and designing the overall program. And year two is when we were able to really kick off actually collaborating with these community-based organizations. And so we're now midway through our second cohort, which is technically year three. And throughout, we've been taking feedback and adjusting the program to make it as successful as possible. Next slide, please. So we have kind of four different things that come up throughout our different meetings. And I'll briefly go through kind of each one and give an example. So with mutual learning, this is going to highlight the two-way communication that occurs within our meetings and the learning that happens between the CMAP team and the cohort. And so an example of this was the other day at our last meeting, we were looking at the CDOT Ogden Avenue Improvement Program project. And one of the CARE members is a local community member that is going to be affected by that project. And so we had her talk to how she experiences the corridor, how she knows how the people in her organization experience the corridor. And then we also invited our resident transportation safety planner here at CMAP to come talk about her perspective when it comes to safety and her involvement with the project so that we can really learn from each other when it comes to these very complex projects. With CMAP projects, pretty straightforward. One that we've been working with recently is our household travel survey team. And the project team came before the cohort to get feedback on how to boost survey participation. They've historically had lower survey participation from low-income communities and communities of color. And so the cohort was able to give really helpful feedback to that team about what might be preventing people from participating and how we can then make those changes in our upcoming household travel survey this year. With shared tools, we're trying to get to a shared language with the cohort. And so this year, the CARE team looked at CMAP's community data snapshot that the agency regularly produces. And then we as a project team were able to create data snapshots that are specific to the geographies of these different community-based organizations so that they can see the data that is reflective of their specific constituency. And then finally, with reflection, relatively self-explanatory, but what this looked like last year is we had a mid-year retreat where we got together with the cohort and discussed how engagement and outreach can be improved within the agency. Next slide, please. Briefly, these were the 7 principles that were articulated before the cohort kicked off to understand how we, our team members at CMAP, not just within the CARE team, but across CMAP at large, want to serve historically marginalized and excluded communities. Next slide, please. And this slide shows the different elements that comprise the CARE program in its initial design. And I want to take a minute to cover how we tried to reduce burdens for participation in each one of these elements. So with the honorarium, each community-based organization receives a $10,000 honorarium, and the payment process is structured so that half is delivered upfront before the program begins. The other half is distributed halfway through the year. And this is so that we can make sure that community-based organizations, which are often operating on a limited financial capacity, don't lose any cash flow for participation. And also the honorarium amount is set to reflect the same hourly rate that we would consider for any one of our external consultants, to reflect the fact that the folks that are working with us are subject matter experts as well. With streamlining the process, we wanted to make sure that the application process itself was easy enough that we wouldn't turn people away from participation before they had even begun to apply. And so the application was designed to take less than an hour to complete. Answers could be pulled from organization websites, so making it a very streamlined process for people that are applying. And then additionally, when it came to the selection process, CMAP staff conducted in-person interviews for the applicants where the applicants were actually based in their home communities to reduce the burden on them from having to come all the way out to CMAP to interview. With multi-year potential, this really just gives us a chance to engage with the organizations on a recurring basis. It's not just a one-time deal. And that kind of goes to the next point, which is relationship building. And we really just want to take the time for the organizations to network and also for us to get to work with them over the course of multiple years to build those relationships and to make sure that we can come to a shared language and understanding of the transportation system and the planning process that we work with on a daily basis at CMAP. And then finally, influence community impact. This is relatively integrated into the general engagement processes, but just the opportunity to influence our projects here at CMAP. Next slide, please. And so these were the 3 criteria that went into the selection process from all of the applicants. We were looking at representation, geography, and commitment. With representation, we want to prioritize those communities that have historically been left out of the planning process. Geography ensures that we're hearing from all parts of our region, from urban areas, rural and suburban areas. And so we seek to balance those across the cohort. And then commitment is essentially, does your organization align with our values of collaboration? And did your application and interview indicate that you'll be passionate about nerding out basically about transportation planning every month? Next slide. And so this is our wonderful first year cohort that we had last year, the 12 different organizations. And this ran from January through December of last year. And I won't go into each one, but their organizations really reflect the variety of focuses and demographics and geographies from across the region, from accessibility to social services to religious-based organizations and others. Next slide. And so we're now in year 2. This kicked off in January of 2024. And related to that multi-year engagement, we only had one organization from the first cohort that decided not to continue. All others stayed on. And the success of the program and our added capacity internally as a project team allowed us to expand the cohort to 14 organizations. So we were able to add 3 new members. And one thing I want to note is that our recruitment process for the second year of the program really worked to make sure that our selection criteria were coming into play. So where are the areas that we're not targeting, which geographies have not been currently represented on the cohort. And so our recruitment phase was a lot more focused for year 2 to make sure that we can make as diverse a cohort as possible, reflective of the diversity across the region. And then the blue bar on the bottom just indicates a lot of the different specializations of the community-based organizations that we're working with. And this just allows us to have really incredible conversations that highlight the intersectional nature of the transportation issues that we talk about. Next slide, please. These next 2 slides are just showing where these cohort organizations are coming from. This is all from Cook County. And the next slide, we can see the organizations that come from our other collar counties. And as I mentioned, we work with our recruitment to make sure that we're trying to reach different organizations. And so if any of you are not seeing an area represented, we would love to hear from you about organizations that you could potentially invite to come to the cohort. Next slide, please. And so what are the care partner priorities? They, as we've shown, have varied interests and focuses. And so when we plan our meetings, we're trying to pick a broad variety of topics and then go deep into those for a session. So with equitable land use and planning, that was kind of one of the things that we were able to do with the segment that we did on Ogden Avenue. And so we were able to talk about how land use contributes to corridor planning, how that appears with transportation access and safety. We were lucky enough to have our project manager and some staff from our Safe Travel for All roadmap come to talk to the cohort, and that specific session really influenced the engagement plan that is currently being executed with our countywide safety action plans. And then with equity and policy and decisions, I think probably the best example of this was that our PART team was able to come to the cohort and discuss how the upcoming fiscal cliff could impact our cohort's ability and their constituents to get around the region, discuss what a better system would look like, and then that all influenced the policy decisions that came in the eventual PART report. Next slide, please. And then what we hope to offer to our partners in this program, access to resources. Obviously, our project managers come before them on a recurring basis, to our data and to our networking, influencing CMAP's projects and processes. And then mutual learning is one new element that we've added this year is for co-chairs from the cohort. And so those are volunteers, members who decide they can come meet with our project team. And then we collaborate on the actual agenda of our upcoming meetings, what activities we'll do, what we'll discuss, and also as a way for them to highlight the work that they're doing based in their own communities. It's been really successful. And then collective regional impact really stems from just the overall consensus of the cohort for working together, each in our own ways, to reduce the burdens of transportation. Next slide. And then finally, I'll just give a brief overview about what we've accomplished so far. In the last year and a half, so 2 years of actual cohort, we've received over 70 applications from 16 municipalities, 9 different CMAP projects, and we continue to bring on more, developed working relationships with all of those community-based organizations and produced work for them in the form of those data snapshots. And then finally, just what we've been able to gain internally. We've done multiple consultant-led workshops on best practices and equitable engagement, all staff training on communications, and overall just trying to make sure that the work that we're doing on a daily basis is really taking into consideration all that these subject matter experts in the form of the community-based organizations have offered very gracefully to us. And I believe that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
Questions? Mayor, go ahead.
I love this concept and thank you for a great presentation. So I represent Lake County. I'm not familiar with that organization. I just did a quick bit of research. I'd like to ask that I'm looking for more information in terms of how the organizations are being identified. The area in Lake County where this group is located, and it seems like it's a satellite office, their headquarters are in Chicago, is not where we're having major transit issues. I would like to see some sort of recognition of the challenges in Waukegan, the challenges in the Round Lake area. the challenges further west, and a better representation, frankly, of the needs of Lake County. So I don't know how we get to that point. I'm happy to help, happy to connect. But I would not like to see like that. We're in Lake County based on that one connection. I just think it's not representative of the true needs. Thanks.
Well, I was just going to say, thanks for identifying that because as Jules mentioned, this is a 2-year pilot program. The funding comes from federal highways. One of the other goals that I think was really important for us to work out through this program is that typically the federal USDOT or Federal Highway Administration doesn't allow for honorariums for programs. So again, I was thinking about Mayor Grasso's question about our funding and what we're spending our resources on. We know how important it is to be, really prudent with our financial resources. So we convinced them through some research and analysis that we did that they could spend their money on honorarium and allow us to do that through the program, spend their money essentially, because it just is so important. So I think we would like to grow this program. Our funding for this ends at the end of this fiscal year or soon-ish. So again, as we think about how we grow this, how we make it more impactful, that's exactly what we need to hear from you all.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up, you have representation from each of these counties. I would lean into that commitment, these stakeholders who come, this is the first I've heard of this in terms of, and again, I just looked up who this organization is. I think that's a missed opportunity to make the use of those who are here and stakeholders. I think there's a great opportunity to talk to all of us who represent the collar counties to say, who should we be in touch with? So I know that's one of the challenges that we have with this organization, sort of this sense by collar counties of being sort of a second thought, that it's very Chicago centric. And I don't say that in any criticism, but just sort of culturally, it feels like there's a lot of support and strength within Chicago and Cook County, and then everybody else is sort of an add-on. So I would urge us to lean into using those of us who are here and forging more of those connections. And frankly, I think given the importance of the subject matter, I don't know that honorarium are even necessary because there is such a strong commitment and desire to have our voices heard. So just my thoughts. Thanks.
Yep, appreciate it.
Mayor?
Develop a map that shows geographically where these.
Would you mind turning your
Mic.
microphone? The question, sorry.
Sorry,
Thank you,
my
Mayor.
apologies. Can we develop a map that shows the geographic locations of these various community organizations that are engaged? I think that'll help us to identify areas where there isn't. I know there is an emphasis on underserved communities, environmental justice communities, and that might help identify some locations.
Yeah, definitely.
Mayor?
And just adding on to what Nancy said, I noticed there was nothing in DuPage County. And I'm from DuPage County, so part of my responsibility here would be to find out how I can help. Like Nancy, I'm not even aware of this, but I did notice that DuPage County has nothing. So
Yeah, and I think
how I can
obviously
help.
part of this presentation is to now make everybody aware and
Yeah.
the outreach, it's not that they're going to turn away as indicated, but our organization needs to know those areas of non-representation or certainly groups that can represent specifically some cities and or in the general area in and around those areas. So yeah, the door's open.
And I will really quick point out that, so for our initial year of the cohort, I wasn't around for the application process at that time, but I believe what we did for our initial outreach was we first were looking and talked to our local planning staff that are doing local technical assistance to try and understand, these are the planners that are out in different communities across the region. And so do they know of any community-based organizations? So we use that as a starting point. And tried to balance all of those different criteria to make sure that we're trying to get as diverse. And then obviously, as Aaron mentioned, like as we're able to add more cohort members, and with each year, we're focusing our recruitment to make sure that we're targeting these areas that aren't currently identified within or represented, I should say, within our current cohort. So it's definitely a work in progress to make sure that we're being as expansive as possible. And if you have any organizations that you know of that you would really like to see, please feel free to reach out, and we'll do everything that we can to make sure that this is the balanced cohort that represents the diversity of the region.
This is Mayor Noak too, and to Mayor Rodering's point earlier too, let's try and make sure we're getting organizations that aren't simply arms of Cook County-based organizations. So we're getting, organizations that are truly based in those regions.
This is Nina Idamudia. I just want to commend the CMAP team for this program. I've been aware of it for the last few years since it started and have been watching very closely, because paying constituents or paying for the time of the experts in community, I think, is a vital point, especially when we're thinking about marginalized communities who don't have the time and resources to just, come to our meetings, come downtown. You're meeting them where they are. So I just want to uplift that this is something. I've worked in government for, a decade on the other side. This is innovative. And in order to inform innovation, you have to leave room for failure, as in we have to iterate. We try something, we give you feedback, which is, yes, we'd like to see more representation from the Collier audience, but I also would like to make sure that it's not going back to the old ways of, well, let me tell you what organizations I work with, and this is the representation, right? So there has to be a balance of kind of, if grassroots is what we're aiming for, then it has to be grassroots. It can't be pre-selected. And so there has to be a process of, we as board members give you a list of organizations that you should look at. And then there should still be a vetting process, which you have clearly outlined. And maybe there's some more articulation of your criteria or your questions about, how are you serving this population? How are you representing this population, and having them tell that story? And then if it falls short, then they don't make it to the next round, right? And I think that there's a way to do that is still equitable and objective, that is not pre-selection from any of the members on this particular committee. And then also, I want to emphasize that the fact that government is paying these honorariums is the core of this program, in order to make sure that those voices are at the table. And this is something that we should absolutely be emulating across all of our programs at CMAP, because I do think if we're really about our values, and again, you call people out on their values, they get a little, a little tense. If this is truly our value, to include these environmental justice areas and to include these marginalized groups, then we have to put in the effort and not just assume that they will show up because we've asked them to. So I just want to commend the CMAP team for doing this, and I'm excited to see further iterations and how we can work on this over time to really right size it, to make sure that the region feels represented.
Mayor, you gonna come?
Clean Air Lake County.
Yeah, we'll make sure to engage with them. And I think you've all highlighted a point here that we need to make sure that we are getting this information to you as we have opportunities available as well. I will just share, I was recently in California, meeting with the Southern California Association of Governments, acronyms, SCAG.
Yes.
I think CMAP's a better acronym than SCAG, but there was a lot of discussion across our peer groups across the country about how to do this more effectively, how to make sure that as we engage with community-based organizations, everybody's sort of like, okay, so is it just a $50 gift card every time, like for participation, or is it truly sort of thinking, I think the way that we've developed this, thinking about like the consultant resources that we spend our money on, and if we're asking folks to spend the time with us here at the agency, that also, has some value here. So I know this is something that is being grappled with across the country in many different ways and many different forums, but we're hoping to lead the pack here and show some of our DOT partners that this is a value and time and money resources well spent. So, Jules, thank you.
Other questions? Jules, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to our legislative update. I know John Carpenter is.
Well, we do have one more
Oh, I'm
item
sorry.
on the agenda here before we get to legislative update.
Skip over. Oh,
Hi, Katie.
Sorry. It was part
All
two
right.
of the agenda.
Yes, part two.
Yes, part two. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Rigstad. I'm a senior planner here at CMAP and the project manager of participatory budgeting, as well as the project manager for the Lansing Capital Improvement Plan. And I'm excited to be here to share more information about how we've partnered with the villages of Lansing and Dixmoor to incorporate participatory budgeting into their capital improvement planning projects. Next slide. Thank you. Before I get into what participatory budgeting is, I just wanted to reflect on why we're doing participatory budgeting. And so if we look at Onto 2050, the region has a goal to make data-driven and transparent investment decisions. And we identify strategies related to increasing transparency in decision-making and increasing access to budget information. And so by incorporating participatory budgeting into capital improvement planning, we're working with our partner communities to build capacity to integrate these elements of participatory budgeting and achieve some of these goals. Next slide. All right. And so just to set some foundational understanding of participatory budgeting and to make sure we're all sharing the same definition, I wanted to go over what the general process is. So participatory budgeting is a structured process that allows residents to directly decide how public funds are spent in their community. It generally follows the same 5 steps of first designing the process, brainstorming ideas, developing proposals, voting, and then funding and implementing the project that wins the most votes. In this process, we're not following what I would call a traditional participatory budgeting process, and that we're working to influence and work within a typical municipal budget process instead of the more common approach of having a large set aside amount of money to fund participatory budgeting outcomes. And there are a few benefits to this, but namely this approach allows us to be sensitive to municipal fiscal and staff capacity while working towards achieving the goals that we have for implementing this process. And so this helps us expand who can take advantage of and benefit from participatory budgeting principles. Next slide. So our goals in this process are to strengthen relationship building and trust between the municipality and their constituents through transparent and accessible outreach. We're looking to increase residents' access to budget information and decision-making in their municipality, amplify resident voice in budget priorities and investment, and to share decision-making power with residents. From the beginning of the project, we worked with our municipal partners to agree on these goals. And to achieve these goals, we worked with Lansing and Dixmoor to transform their typical, usually internal capital improvement planning processes into something that is transparent and empowers residents to guide investment decisions. Next slide. And so one of the strategies that we've used in this process is to create a steering committee. The steering committee for these capital improvement planning projects consists of residents, village staff, and village leadership. The steering committee makeup is designed to be representative of the village demographics and to have staff and leadership involved so that discussions remain informed by village capacity to implement the things identified in engagement. And the steering committee has 2 main roles. The first is to inform our engagement and outreach strategies to help make sure that we're reaching as many residents as possible. And the second is to develop the proposals that residents will vote on based on engagement results. Next slide. All right. And so our steering committee has put us to work in gathering ideas. We have been out in community at existing events, including trick or treat, a trunk or treat, a tree lighting. We were at mail shredding day. We've gone to Valentine's Day. We were recently at STEM night. Basically, if the steering committee told us about an event and expressed that they felt it would help us reach a lot of people or a new group of people in the community that we hadn't reached, we've been out there. And in addition to that, we've tried new approaches, including a mailing to residents of a survey with a prepaid return envelope. And based on our steering committee feedback, we also have incorporated in Dixmoor a raffle for completed surveys. So we have 4 $50 gift cards that a completed survey enters residents in as an opportunity to win. And so Dixmoor is still in the gathering ideas phase, but in Lansing, We recently completed this phase and collected over 1,600 responses, which is roughly about 14% of households in Lansing. Next slide. All right, and so in Lansing, we're moving forward with the voting phase. The steering committee took all of that feedback, that 1,600 responses from the community to develop a set of 5 proposals that aligned with resident priorities and were feasible for the village to implement, considering their funding and capacity. The proposals developed include a program to inventory sidewalk and fill in gaps in their network, a Safe Routes to School program, purchasing speed trailers, and hiring an arborist to oversee tree maintenance and plantings. For voting in Lansing, the ballot will be available online, in person at the Municipal Center and the library, and mailed out with a return envelope similar to how we did surveys. And then to get the initiative out in front of folks, as you can see here, we were recently at the Good Neighbors Parade with a banner, Mappy on a Stick, and we were passing out a number of flyers with information about the project. And the most exciting part of this pilot is that the proposal that wins the most votes from residents will be incorporated into the capital improvement plan for year 1 implementation. So through this process, residents will have been able to identify priorities, select a discrete project that addresses their priorities, and then see the implementation of that project that was selected. Our partners have worked with us to open up what is usually a black box kind of technical process and partnered with their residents to develop a budget that will be more aligned with what the community says is important. If you go to the next slide. All right, and so through this process, we have a few lessons learned along the way. First, one size does not fit all. Municipalities in our region have different levels of capacity to do the intensive work that participatory budgeting requires. If we reflect on the goals, there are many ways that we can approach the work and still achieve what we set out to do. In the beginning of the process, it's important to work with our partners to understand capacity and adjust accordingly. A diverse steering committee helps make connections that expand the reach of a project. Our steering committees admittedly did take a while to develop, but the juice has been worth the squeeze. And so an example in Dixmoor, one of our steering committees is on the school board and helped us connect to that STEAM night that we recently went to. And we were able to collect input from youth and adults and then made more connections with school staff, something that we had been having a hard time doing without our steering committee member. The feasibility constraints are an important consideration when creating an engagement strategy. So in this process, we're working to strengthen the relationships between residents and the municipality and empower those residents to influence the budget. And we don't want to go out into the community to gather input without understanding what budget and timing constraints are in place so that we're not creating any false hopes or false expectations about what the outcome could be. Flexibility in outreach methods helps reach into the community. So I mentioned all of those various approaches and events that we went to that we were able to connect to based on our steering committee feedback. Being prepared to adjust our outreach strategies as opportunities have arisen or the steering committee has identified them has helped us reach folks and achieve some big goals like generating all of those responses in Lansing. And finally, participatory budgeting does not necessarily need to be named in the process. So capital improvement planning is already a very technical and multi-step process. Instead of trying to explain participatory budgeting, we found it was better to just say, all right, this is how we're doing engagement for this plan, and this is how we will use it. So baking the participatory budgeting principles into the process instead of making it separate helps with the feasibility and not wanting to make no false hopes objectives. It helps bring partners along to understand how this can be done and how the results will work. And it helps keep it as simple as possible for residents to understand and engage with. And I believe that is it for my slides.
Thank you. Nice report. Any comments? Good job. Good luck.
Thank
Moving on to Item 603 in the legislative update, again, John Carpenter, I know is still down in Springfield.
He is in Springfield. We did have the Regional Planning Act cleanup bill language that would amend the voting requirements on contracts and procurements. Has passed both houses with 3 readings and swapped houses. And so there was a hearing this morning that John is down there for. I'm sorry if I'm stealing your thunder.
Go ahead, Cassia.
We'll let Kasha.
Oh, good. We're moving
Up here.
through more quickly. It's great. Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. Kasha Hart with the Intergovernmental Affairs team. Happy May. So we are at the part of the legislative session where each chamber is hearing the bills from the opposite chamber. So bills are continuing to progress through the legislative process, but obviously the big outstanding item is the FY25 budget. We anticipate that the budget legislation is going to be dropped in the coming days, weeks, maybe. As we have in the past, CMAP staff have reviewed the governor's FY25 budget proposal. And we just have a couple of initial key takeaways. We're going to have a longer analysis that we'll be able to share later. So the budget is responding to some evolving macroeconomic conditions while inflation is slowing, persistent economic pressures, and the expiration of pandemic-related federal aid is going to present greater uncertainty in future budget years. I think that's something we've talked about before around this table. Another item our analysis discusses, and we know this is an issue that you're all following very, very closely, but also just wanted to make note of the proposed elimination of the grocery tax, which does come at a time when state support to local governments is declining. And then finally, on the FY25 budget, just one other item that's kind of garnered some attention is this proposed transfer of $175 million from the road fund to supplement the annual state contributions to the public transportation fund. In the past, those contributions have come from the general fund. The team who led the budget analysis noted that the state has been shifting sales tax collections from motor fuel from the general fund to the road fund over the last several years. And so with this year's transfer, it effectively offsets that new $175 million transfer. I think the key takeaway that I'm trying to articulate here is that, the need remains to grow the overall pie of funding that we have available for both our transportation capital and operating needs. So as I noted, we're going to be publishing a longer summary of the FY25 budget at a later date, and we're happy to share that once it's complete. And then just some quick updates on some of our priority bills, as Erin noted. So SB 3389 has a hearing right now as we speak. I was hoping to give you all a late breaking update, but John is testifying right now. But both those bills have both progressed through each of their respective chambers. So we're hopeful that that kind of continues to advance through the process. And then finally, on the appropriations bill, both of those bills have remained in their respective committees. Again, we haven't expected those to advance on their own. The real goal of the appropriations bill is to, work those into the FY25 budget. And we're continuing to have conversations with legislators and the budgeteers about that. And we do appreciate the conversations you all have had in Springfield too with legislators about this. To keep the conversation moving forward, a meeting request was sent to the governor in order to kind of share a little bit more about this bill, why it's important, how it impacts the work that we do in the region, with the goal of having a meeting prior to the end of the legislative session. So we'll certainly keep you all apprised of how that unfolds. As always, your packet includes other bills that we're tracking. Since the next time we'll convene will be after the end of the legislative session, we'll shift this to be more of a recap of what transpired over the last several months.
Yes, thank you. And as far as direct appropriation for us, we'll not go through a bill as usual. It'll be at the end with a BIM bill and a budget bill. And I spoke briefly to the governor about CMAP's dilemma. He indicated an interest. We're still trying to arrange a meeting for him with that. In the meantime, I've reached out to leadership, both the House and the Senate, regarding the budgeteers to keep that in mind this time around. And I encourage board members to give leadership a call. Again, remind them of the story that this agency was never funded from day one, and it's about time that they do it for all the good work that we do. So if you can take a moment out of, or whether you're going to be down in Springfield, especially get a hold of the budgeteers or leadership to indicate that, we're hoping this is the year that funding goes forward. But thank you. And yeah, the other bills seem like they're going to be okay.
I think so.
Any other questions in the legislative? Thank you.
Thank you.
Move on to other business. Public comment? Well, welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman Bennett and Board Directors. I'm Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines now living in Des Moines, Iowa. This month will be 3 years since we left the Chicagoland area. And Mayor Roderick, me and my wife used to go through Highland Park. We were on the ADA Advisory Committee, so we know about that. And Mayor Grasso, we used to go through DuPage, so we know about Elm, Hearst, Lombard, Wheaton. So I got a lot of my friends there, so we know the connection. So I'm glad to be back here. But Mayor Roenick, Mayor Noak, I hope you can listen in, because my biggest concern is when you tell at the PACE board meeting, there are some bus stops that has no sidewalks, especially in the Will County area, because a couple of years ago, me and my wife was coming through Joliet, and I saw some bus stops that had no sidewalks. And I think other areas too in your communities, you should have PACE check on, see where there is no sidewalks, where the bus stop sign is, especially for the general public and individuals with disabilities, if they are waiting at the bus stops and it's grassy. So when the bus lowers the ramp, how can they cooperate with that? Because that is my biggest concern. So are they going to be putting in installments of some sidewalks where the bus stop is in a grassy field area or not? Because that is the hardest part of the mall. And then also too, if they're crossing the street too, when they're getting off the bus, and then there's no traffic light because an incident could be happening, will they install like crosswalks, like when they're getting ready to push the button, crossing the street over, so that they will not be the intended target because some driver's going like recklessly in a road rage? So I just wanted to make sure if PACE and all of you and IDOT and all of y'all work together, look at it to see in your counties where the bus stops are, where in a grassy field, since there's no sidewalks, because that could be, that's like a barrier there for individuals with disabilities and seniors too, who is waiting at the bus stop, want to get on there, because just to make sure that they're well aware of it and be extremely well prepared for this, because we don't know when that they'll say, hey, there's no sidewalk and something like that if they can't handle it. So I hope PACE can be, I hope Mayor Noak, when he goes to the board meeting, I hope he can be well prepared for this. So he can.
Darlin, I'll be happy to discuss that with all those entities, and I'll also let Julie Mayor Odekirk know as well.
All right, Mayor Noak. So you tell them at the board meeting, because that's really deeply concerned. So that's all I have to say. Any comments or questions for while we're here?
Thanks, Garland. You continue to be an advocate for ADA. We appreciate it.
All right, and hold on, let me get the mic to my wife here. Hold on.
Hi, my name is Heather Armstrong. I used to also live in Des Plaines, and now I live in Des Moines, Iowa. I have I didn't know why the state wanted to merge the 3 carriers. I can only think it would have been they've heard bad stories about CTA, because Metro and Pace are doing awesome. It's CTA, and especially on the buses, they don't want to strap down the wheelchairs. And I've known people on the buses that they went flying because their chair was not even tied down. And we're Pace, at least they tie down the wheelchair. And they always ask if you want the lap and shoulder belts. But CTA doesn't even want to do anything. So I can understand why we need to merge it. Probably merge CTA with Metro and Pace, because those 2 organizations know how safe they are. Whereas CTA, they're not very safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Again, welcome guys back. No other comments before the board? Anybody online? The executive committee will not be meeting. We don't have a in-quorum, in-person quorum. So we will meet again next week, next month. I remind the board member, next month is our last meeting for basically the summer. We'll be off July and August, so please, your attendance is important for that last meeting in June. And with that in mind, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moving to second, all in favor, signify by the usual manner. Motion carried, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.